Okay, hopefully this will work better. Hopefully this will work better now. I've got Q&A enabled here. So the way that I'd like to do this is for you guys to submit questions, and then I can try to explain things, and hopefully that will give us a chance to interact a little bit and allow me to answer what's most important to you guys as you're working through this and as you have questions on your homework there. So you should have a Q&A little link over. Mine shows up on the left side of my screen here, but please, I guess, just submit questions that you might have, something that maybe you want a little bit more explanation about, and I'll try to answer it as well as I can. If there's anything specific that you're interested in that maybe you're having trouble with your homework, please submit a question here, and then I can try to talk about what's important and what can help you guys as you're working through your homework. So it's going to work best for me if you can post questions here. It's going to be using this Q&A app here. Shows up on the left side of my screen, and hopefully you can see that and access it and ask questions as well. Okay, if you're interested in a specific question, use the key to post your question there, and then I can answer what's most important to you guys. Okay. Yeah, I haven't got any real questions yet. This is the the session, the homework, and it has started. So, okay, go over problem. Okay. It looked like my screen crashed for a minute there. If I don't use the video, I think it's probably going to be fine. It's probably just my network connection's not fast enough. Okay, so I've got a question about going over problem 3 in chapter 6. So in chapter 6, problem 3, this was about normalization. Can you be a little bit more specific with that? I mean, I'm not going to necessarily just work out the problem for you, but I can help you if there's something specifically that maybe you're having trouble with. So question 3 on chapter 6 talks about, basically shows a table there with data in it, and wants you to write a relational schema, draw the dependency diagram, and identify all dependencies. And then remove all partial dependencies and identify the normal forms for each table you created. Okay, so part A. Part A wants you to write the relational schema and draw its dependency diagram. Identify all dependencies, including partial and transitive dependencies. So if you'll look at examples throughout the chapter there, the relational schema basically lists out the different field names in the table. And so the field names in this table would be the INV num, prod num, sale date, prod label, VIN code, VIN name, quant sold, and prod price. And so each of those will be a different box. And then using arrows, you're going to show what the different dependencies are. And dependencies is basically where if you know the value for one field there, then the value for another field in that same entity depends on the value for that one. Does that answer your question? Okay, are there other questions either over chapter 5 or chapter 6? Is there something specifically that I can maybe explain better or work through? Maybe an example that I can give? Okay, I've got one from Audrey here for chapter 6. Do we want to rename the quant sold field like they renamed ours in the problem solved in the chapter text? Is quantity a sufficient name for that table, or is there a better name that we should find? When they're creating other tables, you pretty much just name the table whatever makes sense to you. And Okay. Yeah, you pretty much name the table whatever makes sense to you and whatever makes sense in the context of the information in there. If you end up having either partial or transitive dependencies, what's going to happen with that is you're going to have to create more tables to basically separate out those fields into the places where they make most sense. And in that case, you will rename some table names. I don't know that you necessarily need to rename field names because for the most part, I think the field names will be fairly consistent. Is that good? Okay, any other questions? I know it's a lot of information, and this is a very technical class. In the summer session, I know it's difficult to kind of absorb everything, but I'm hoping that through doing these homeworks and then revising them, that'll give you the opportunity to learn in that context. Okay, so I've got a question here on question 4, chapter 5. Do we need to draw the whole design seen on 4.36? No, you don't. You only need to draw the entities that are affected by the modifications. So let's look at that real quick, and I can kind of give you direction with that. So let me go ahead and flip to 4.36 as well. So in 4.36, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 entities there. And on number 4, the first thing that it says is it talks about employees. So we know we're going to need the employee entity from that. So actually, there isn't an employee entity. There's a professor entity. There's going to be a relationship there. I'm not going to necessarily say exactly what that is, but it's going to expand on where professor is. So staff, professor, administrator, and those are all employees. And then it also talks about departments. So department is an entity there, and so you'll want to include that entity. Let's see what else. Dean of a college. I wonder if that means school. Huh. And then a professor can teach many classes. So you'll definitely need the class entity for sure, because it talks about professors teaching classes. Yeah. So I think you definitely, at least from that ERD on 4.36, you need professor, department, class. Other than that, I don't necessarily think anything else is affected by the modifications there. You are going to add some entities as well. Does that answer your question? Okay, any other questions? Okay, how to draw subtypes. That's a good one. Okay, so for this, I'm going to do screen sharing, and I'm going to go into Lucidchart, and I'll show you how I've done supertypes and subtypes in there. Oops, not desktop. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to open up a new tab here, go to Lucidchart, log in. And I actually have some of these saved, and I'll open one of these that I have saved because this kind of shows what we've got here. Okay. To do this, basically, I just added some other shapes. So I think I used the shapes. Okay. Some containers or standard. Let's see what this is, if it tells me. Okay, I think I just used it from the flowchart here. And then I used a line from somewhere. So, so if I wanted a subtype below hourly, I could get a couple from the ERD, could drag one entity here, drag another entity over here, and if I want these to be subtypes, then rather than connecting them relationally, which is how we usually do it like this, I'm going to delete that. Rather than doing it that way, I'm going to put a circle in here. Oops. Give me a little bit more room in here. I'm going to put a circle in there, and I can type in the circle, which is nice. So if I wanted it to be overlapping or disjoint, I can say D for disjoint. And then I think I can just drag the normal line deal here, and rather than having the crow's foot notations on either side there, I think that I can make each side, if I scroll up here, I can choose none. And then for the endpoint, I can choose none. And then it just gives me a straight line, which is cool because that's actually what I want. Then I can do the same thing over here. I can connect these and then modify both of my endpoints to be none. And do the same thing over here. Modify both endpoints to be none. Now the only other part there is we want to show if it's partial or complete. And to do that, we're going to need a line. And so here's a line tool. I can put it right here, and I can change my endpoints over there and give it none. So one line if I want it to be partial, 2 lines if I want it to be complete. So I'll draw another line down here, and again change my endpoint to none. So anyway, it's not quite as easy as it is to do other things, but it is fairly simple to be able to do that. So let me get back in here and stop screen sharing. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question there. Okay. So we've got another question here for the same problem. The 4.36 figure lists that professor is dean of the school, but the homework problem says professor is dean of the college. College and school. Okay, that's what was actually confusing me when I was looking back in there. Colleges and schools are generally used interchangeably in an academic environment. So at West Texas A&M, we have the College of Business, and then we have a new school of, I think it's engineering, computer science, and something else. At some point, that one will become a college. It's a little bit different designation, but it means almost the exact same thing. So assume that college and school are the exact same thing. You can call it either of those in your homework, but those are used interchangeably, and either the author didn't remember what he did in the previous chapter or something there, but those are the same thing. Okay, other questions? Okay, got another question here for chapter 5 and 6. Select this. For chapter 5 and 6, do we specifically need to write out the primary key and foreign key attribute relations, like the textbook writes out for us examples, or do we just need to show the entity tables with the appropriate relations between each? I would say it depends on whether or not the attributes are important in the context of the business rules. In chapter 6, I would say definitely yes, because in chapter 6 you're taking one big entity and you're separating out into smaller entities, and I need to know that you understand which attributes go with which entities. So chapter 6, definitely, I need to see all the attributes there. Chapter 5, it just kind of depends. So let's see. I would think anything that is modified between the thing in 4.36 and what you're creating here. If there are any attributes that change from one entity to another, I need to see that. And then also it looks like in some of the business rules, it talks about some things that would be specific attributes, and I need to see that as well. So if there's something in a business rule that's basically creating a new attribute, then I need to see that. Okay, I've got another question here. One and only one. Okay. There are cases when you would say 0 to 1. There's cases when you would say 1 and only 1, and there are cases when you would say just 1 without designating one or the other. Now, in our homework, your last homework 1 over chapters 3 and 4, there were some cases when it didn't necessarily designate when it was going to be one and only one, and when it was going to be optional one. But there were other cases where it did basically imply that. So one good example, let me think, when it talked about an employee being a manager of a department or running a division. In that case, you kind of need to think through the business context and recognize that not every employee that's in the employee table is going to be the manager of the department. there will only be some of those. So in that case, you need to recognize from the employee to the department side, each employee may be a manager, but may not be a manager. So in that case, the 0 to 1 designation would be the most appropriate to say. However, from the other side of things, if you're thinking about the department, one and only one employee is the manager. And so in that case, I would say strict one and only one. However, there are other cases where they don't give you enough information to really know that. And in that case, I would just use one. Okay, any other questions? And if you don't know how to do the questions, it's the little Q&A thing. I think it's on the left side of your screen. You can use that to type questions. I'll wait a couple more minutes, but if there aren't any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. But I definitely want to give you guys as much assistance as I can. I know it's definitely a technical class, and there are some things that are difficult to understand. Okay. So here's one similar to the last question on business rule context. What would the rules be for promotions in Chapter 5, Problem 7, employment history? Okay. Yes, they can have multiple promotions. So yeah, you need to think about that. There will be multiple, if you're talking about history in general, nearly every time you have history, you have the opportunity to have multiple records in there for each record that's associated to it. So yeah, definitely assume that they can have multiple employment actions. Okay. Problem 8, Chapter 3. This is, I mean, I definitely can answer it here, but I'm actually going to record a solution for that one. So I will address that again, but I'll go ahead and answer it here. Okay, so Problem 8, Chapter 3, the relationships we should add are manager, employees, and contains. Okay, so I think what you're talking about is the one where we had you had employee, you had department, and you had region, and you were relating those three entities there. And so the correct way to do it is you needed to have two different relationships between employee and department. One relationship basically says a department employs multiple employees, and so it's a one-to-many relationship there. But then you have another relationship that says an employee may be a manager of a department, and each department has exactly one manager. So on one side of it, it's a 0 to 1, and one side it's a mandatory one. The relationship between region and department, I think everybody got. So I don't think there was any problem with that one. But it was a little bit, you really had to pay attention to recognize that there were two separate relationships between employee and department. All right, any other questions? Okay, I apologize for that. I lost my connection for a minute there. Okay, so we got a couple of questions here. Can we resubmit the homework to get a grade up to 75? Yes. So 75 is the most, is the highest grade that you can get on a homework that was resubmitted. So if you scored higher than a 75, then it doesn't necessarily help you to resubmit it. But that's, it's basically just to kind of pull up, to give you an opportunity to be able to improve what you've done there. The other thing is when I record the solutions, I'll always record them using a video type deal. So it's something that you will kind of have to go through the motions of actually doing the things that I'm talking about in the videos rather than just copying and pasting and things like that. So I really want you guys to learn the information, and that's my main priority there. And so I don't necessarily want you to spend a lot of time redoing homework if you understood it well enough, and I kind of consider, if you scored at least a 75, then I think you understood it well enough to be able to move on. But if you didn't understand it that well, I want you to redo your homework, because I think that in that process of revising it, that's a learning opportunity that I want you guys to go through. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, it sounds like we haven't gotten a question actually about the homework in a few minutes here, so I'm going to assume that at least I was able to help as much as possible through this interface here. May try to find a better technology to support this. I think this worked okay, but not completely satisfied that I was able to really interact as well. Anyway, but hopefully this was beneficial to you guys. I appreciate you interacting with me and helping each other here, because I think by asking questions, you give everyone the benefit of hearing the answers there. So I appreciate y'all participating, and yeah, thank you for your time there. So feel free to keep posting in Q&A and places like that for further questions. I'll try to keep up with that and stay on top of that. I am going out of town this weekend, but I'm going to try to have the computer with me and be able to reply to you guys fairly quickly if you have any trouble as you're working through things. I know a lot of you guys work full time, and the weekends really when you're able to spend your time. So I want to make sure that I'm able to help you as much as I can. So y'all have a good evening. Thanks.